I don't know if you're hanging with the text that she was reading with us there, but there was something that was repeated several times in the course of the text. The text was from Titus. This was a letter that Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote to Titus, a young man that Paul had left in the island of Crete to look after a group of young, immature believers. And the text that she read here, 1 through 8, was Paul's instructions to Titus and what he needed to teach the people. And I thought it was curious that in verse 1 it said there, you must teach what is in accord with sound doctrine. What does the Scripture teach us? And then it says in verse 2, teach older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled. Looking down at verse 3, likewise teach older women to be reverent. Then they can train younger women to love their husbands and their children and be self-controlled. And pure, and to be busy at home, and to be kind, and subject to their husbands, go on. But in verse 6, similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled in everything. Set them as an example in doing what is good. But I thought it was interesting as I was looking at our text today is Proverbs. We've been teaching through Proverbs now for a long time. But we're in chapter 25 today. And I'm finding the subject of self-control surfaces throughout the whole chapter. And I just happened to stumble on this passage here in Titus, and it jumped off the page because I was thinking of the thought self-control and realized how much that was core to the teaching Paul wanted Titus to give to young, immature believers. And so I thought it would be cool for us to take a look at this as we look at chapter 5 and we look at the Proverbs, the instructions, the comparisons, the teaching that's there, that we would see it and understand it in the context of how this demonstrates to us how to live a life that's in self-control. I wanted to mention just something else to you. I think you remember that chapters 1 through 22 of the Proverbs were the original Proverbs that Solomon were put together in a single scroll, and that chapters 22 through 24 were Proverbs from other godly men that Solomon chose to add to his scroll at the end. And then we find that something really interesting happened here, and we see it in verse 1 of chapter 25, and it says this, these are more Proverbs of Solomon. So 1 through 22 were Solomon's Proverbs, 22 through 24 were others that he had added, and now in chapter 25, these are more of Solomon's, copied by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah. And what's curious about this is to understand Hezekiah was king 200 years after Solomon died. And Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, was a very wicked man. He nailed shut the temple doors so you couldn't go into the sanctuary or to worship. And so Hezekiah came and his son. He opened up the doors to the temple complex, and he searched out the scriptures, and in the process of that found these Proverbs of Solomon that were not a part of the original scroll. So he ordered his men to gather Solomon's Proverbs, another 175 some. Remember, there are 375 Proverbs in chapters 1 through 22. And now there's an additional 175 Proverbs that he found and added to the scroll. So, and now we have the whole scroll plus a couple more that will come. The last two chapters are two other people that were added to the scroll as well. But I just thought that was kind of curious to understand that Solomon, I'm trying to remember the exact location now, and I'm not coming up with it in my head, but he wrote thousands of Proverbs. That wasn't just the 300 and 75 that were recorded in the scroll. But let's look at some of the proverbs that are here and the wisdom that was taught. In verse 2, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. As the heavens are high and the earth is deep, so the hearts of kings are unsearchable. And here Solomon defines a distinction between God and a king. The glory of God and the glory of kings. The glory of God is in knowing all things. He knows everything that's going on. He knows what's happened in the past, he knows what's happening right now, and he knows the future and tells us concerning that. And we find that throughout the prophets of the Old Testament, and through the words of Jesus in the New Testament as well. Well, as far as that goes, along with Peter and John, also had a lot to say about what happens in the end of time. But God knows all things. The Scripture teaches us that He knows the thoughts that are in our mind right now before they even come out of our mouth. And on top of that, He knows the intent of our heart, which often I don't know why I do what I do, but God knows all those things about us. He knows all men, all women, all people, everywhere at all time. And knowing all things, He's able to conceal, because no one else knows what He knows. And that's the difference between God, the glory of God, in that He knows all things and can conceal or hide if He so chooses. On the other hand, you have the glory of the king, and his glory is to be able to search out the knowledge of God, not knowing. He can observe, he can look, he can question, and that's the glory of a king, the glory of mankind, that we have the ability to learn about God and all that He has created. And it's interesting, too, that in the last generation, maybe 2 generations, education was based on the thought that we have fact, we have knowledge, and we are imparting that knowledge to you, as if that was ours, and we own this. And I said, there isn't a fact in the world, in print or spoken any place, that wasn't first observed, questioned, learned, and became predictable to a degree that says that's true. But we all learn that way by observing, not because we know, innately. That's the difference between the glory of God and the glory of a king, the glory of man. Mankind can search and learn. God knows. And that's the point of the glory of God and the glory of kings in this. And the verse 3 there, it says, as the heavens are high and the earth is deep, so the hearts of kings are unsearchable. And I'm going, gee, I don't know any man, king, or any human being who can't be searched. You can't search out what's in the heart of man. We don't do real well at hiding what is in us or not in us. But I said, what could this mean, that so the hearts of kings are unsearchable? I've only thought this, unsearchable in the sense that a king, in order to rule, doesn't reveal his heart to everybody, everything, because that would place him in a weak position, that he could be anticipated, that someone could manipulate and move. And maybe in that sense, that the king would hold some things close to himself for the sake of protecting his position and protecting the kingdom that he rules in. But I don't know what other explanation to give to the word unsearchable, but that at least made some sense to me to say that. So I passed it on to you. The proverb of kings, of the kings, that the first 6 verses here are all represented of one's relationship to the king. But look at verse 4. Here's a parable, a simile again for us here. Remove the dross from the silver, and out comes material for the silversmith. Remove the wicked from the king's presence, and his throne will be established through righteousness. So here's Solomon just saying, do you understand the word dross? You know something about metal? I grew up working in a print shop. My dad published in the newspaper and had a print business when he sold the paper. And so I grew up working in presses and really old-fashioned kind of printing. We had a drawer full of type, capital letters, lowercase letters, I don't know how many, 100 different fonts and stuff that would be all there in this tray of, then you take each of those letters and put them together in a row, and you squeeze them together and you put them in a type frame, and you put ink on it and press paper on it, and you get printing. That's what I grew up doing. In my last years at the print shop, we had offset printing, where we had a metal plate. It was like photographic. You had an image on a metal plate, and wherever the image was, water would not adhere to it. And so you'd put this metal plate on a drum, and it would turn, and water would go across the drum. You'd put a degree of water on the drum so that it would spin, and the whole metal sheet would be wet, except where the letters were. And then as it spun, you would add ink, and wherever there was no water, ink would attach, and then you'd run paper through, and the ink would transfer to paper. That was a pretty cool system going like this. And now I push a button and it comes out on my printer. I don't know, it's just straight from my computer. But why did I tell you all that? Well, because it's fun for me. But one of the things we did, the type in the newsprint, or like even my notes that I have here, you see these letters, each line would be a lead, they called it a slug, a piece of metal with type on the top. And you put all these together and you create a surface you could print like this. And so you have all this lead, made this slug that had the type on it, and you do your business, you print whatever you're going to do, and when you're done, all of that lead has ink on it and has other pollutants on it, and you can reuse that lead, but it's full of pollutants. And so you have to melt it down in a pot. And dross, you know, as the lead melts, it gets all crusty on the top. And that's dross, it's impurities. And you scoop it off, and underneath that dross, it's like a mirror. You can look in and see your reflection in it. It's because it's pure, the impurities are gone. So that's the image that's given here. Remove the dross from the silver, not the lead. But the picture is here, much clearer, more pure, even the silver. And out comes material that the silversmith can use. Because if a silversmith uses impure material to do his work, whatever he creates will crack or corrode. He needs a pure piece of metal to work with. And so the comparison, the story, the point of Solomon's thought here is that dross in metal and wickedness in mankind have a parallel. Remove the wickedness from the king's presence, it says, and his throne will be established through righteousness, through good, through purity, through truth. And so there's a point here in terms of control on the part of the king. If he wants a righteous kingdom, he needs to put out the wickedness, not to tolerate it in his presence. A king who tolerates wickedness in his presence will be corrupted in his rule and affect his reign, affect his people, affect his life, end his life. And we have illustrations of that through all the Old Testament, in the Kings and Chronicles, the stories of one king who was wicked, one king who was righteous, and what happened in their kingdoms in that course of time. So he's just saying here, don't allow things that are evil, things that are destructive in your heart and life, if I took it down to a personal level. We tolerate things in our life that sap life from us. We may tolerate it in the foods that we eat. We may tolerate in the activities of our life. We may tolerate things that we watch in the movies or in TV, or the things that we read, the things that our eyes see. And we tolerate things that corrupt us. And they said, that doesn't serve you well in life. We've been reading those Proverbs from Solomon, all these 24 chapters prior to this. And here we find again this example related to a king. In verse 6, it says this, do not exalt yourself in the king's presence. Don't make yourself out to be somebody you're not. To look bigger, better, more important, more influential than you are. Be transparent, be honest, be real. Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among great men. I don't know if you've ever observed somebody like that. Pushes their way in to position themselves to be in a place of recognition or influence, honor. It's sad when that happens at the highest places of government. It's sad when it happens in a home. Don't exalt yourself. Here, specifically in the king's presence, respect authority. Walk in humility. Don't make yourself out to be something you're not. Verse 7, it is better for you, him, to say to you, come up here, than for him to humiliate you before a nobleman. Walk in and sit in the high place of honor, only to be moved away from it. He said, don't do that. Wait outside. Exert self-control. Don't speak out of turn. It's always best to enter with respect and humility into any setting. And I've discovered, at least in my life, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that pride easily surfaces in us. We read that in Proverbs 16:18. Recall that. Pride comes before the fall. Choose to walk with humility and respect among others. Jesus quoted this proverb in Luke chapter 14, verse 7. It says, when Jesus, noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. But in the parable goes on from there. But it's just that Jesus, again, authenticating this truth recorded by Solomon that God gave to him to start with. And we also find that James, in his letter at the end of the New Testament, in chapter 4, also quotes this. He gives example of it. Don't make yourself out to be something you're not. Don't seek the place of honor. Solomon instructs us to be respectful before rulers and people of authority. He also tells us to do the same thing among our peers and our neighbors. And he has a couple of proverbs here that address the neighbor. He makes a statement in verse 7. It says, what you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court. For what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame? If you argue your case with a neighbor, do not betray another man's confidence, or he who hears it may shame you, and you will never lose your bad reputation. Here again demonstrates some self-control. The example there in 7 and 8 is that you see something and you make an assumption about what was going on. You may or may not understand what you saw. So be slow to make a judgment of someone else based on an observation. You don't know the motive of their heart. You don't know the circumstances of what maybe led up to what it was that they did that didn't look appropriate to you in a moment. But don't take a man to court over what you see and don't really know. That's his point that's here. Respect other people. Don't jump to conclusions. Look deeper. Ask questions. Seek to clarify. Lest, in this case, you be embarrassed by your thoughtless reaction to something. And this includes taking someone to court and making public something that you said in confidence, or that someone else said in confidence. Don't be too quick to take control of every situation that you may be engaged in. Walk with some humility. Walk with some respect. Beginning in verse 11, there are several statements that come out here that help us to understand not only do we have to guard our behavior and how we relate to other people around us, but to guard what comes out of our mouth, the words that we say. In verse 11, a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Carefully chosen words can be attractive and highly valued. Be thoughtful about what you say, how you say what you say. I had an illustration, but it's probably there's a lot of examples for us in saying something kind rather than saying something that simply describes something that may be understood as being critical, judgmental, or a put down of somebody else. Verse 12, like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is a wise man's rebuke to a listening ear. That even in our words of correction to somebody else can be kind, can be gentle, can be appropriate. They don't have to be harsh and critical and humiliating. It's like an earring of gold, an ornament of fine gold. Is someone who's wise in how they communicate a correction of somebody else. Guard your words. Use self-control in how you say and what you say to somebody or to other people. Verse 13, like the coolness of snow at harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the spirit of his masters. Now, Carla and I came from farm country in eastern Washington. We spent our childhood in a community of about 5,000 people. When my dad moved us to this town, there were 120 there. But there was a future that was coming. There was a large military air base that was being put in just outside of town, and Grand Coulee Dam was being built on the Columbia River, not far from there as well. And it was producing electricity used in aluminum in the manufacture of planes during World War II. So there was a future there, and Dad took us to this place, this small town. And but anyway, harvest time is not a time when you want snow. So I'm looking at like the coolness of snow at harvest time. That struck me strangely when I first read that. But I think the point here is that if you've been sent by somebody to represent them and you do it in a trustworthy manner, that is refreshing. That's the point, the words that are here. It's refreshing to the one who did the sending, that you were trustworthy, that you did what was expected to do and you did it well. But the thought of the coolness of snow at harvest time, and I did some more thinking about this too, that I said, you know, there are times this last week when, well, even this morning, for instance, at 7 o'clock this morning, it was 48 degrees in Orange. And we know that coolness came off at this point in time, came off of what snow is left in the hills, but quickly disappeared because the snow is gone, and we still have some winds from the northeast that's coming our way, but it's bringing warm air to us now, and we're going to get that heat for the next few days. But there is a cool air that does come off snow into us in the dry, warmer area here in the valley below. I said, in that sense, maybe like the coolness of the snow breeze at harvest time, is what it could be saying there. Or it could be that it's the snow that was brought down from the mountains to put in a drink, to make the ice, to cool things, because they didn't have refrigerators then. But whatever it means, the trust here is refreshing. Trust. On the other hand, there's no trust when you say you'll give something and then don't do it. Look at verse 14. Like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of gifts he does not give. He boasts of being generous, but he doesn't do what. It's someone who would make a pledge to give or to do or to participate and not produce, not do it. He's like clouds and wind with no refreshing rain with it. Boasting never produces good. A life lived with humble confidence and a heart of service will be a welcome presence anywhere. Verse 15, through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. It's from this verse that I grabbed the title, The Influence of Self-Control. When I'm able to consider the situation I'm in, to live my life in respect of the people around me, the king, the ruler, or anybody, when I can walk in humility and gentleness and kindness, with interest, with affirmation of others, when I can walk in that kind of manner and posture and say, that's my choice. I'm going to exert control in my mouth and my behavior and posture to walk in humility because it honors God and it ends up being the best way to walk and live my life. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded. He may oppose you. He may not like your ideas. He may not want what you represent. But a gracious, gentle, humble, confident spirit will influence him. And a gentle tongue is powerful. It can break a bone, is the statement that's here. Even the toughest of authorities can be influenced by trustworthy counselors who gently, patiently present wise perspective. And then we find some more example here, beginning in 16, of self-control. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it, and you will vomit. So it is possible to have too much of a good thing. But how do you exert self-control in that context? We've had a parable before that about gluttony. It said, put a knife to your throat. I mean, don't cut your throat. But the thought is, be careful about how much you eat and how much you take in. Self-control is often demonstrated by restraint. I'm free to do, but this is not a healthy thing, helpful thing, so I choose to restrain myself. I exert self-control in a situation. And that's what he's saying here. If you find honey, eat just enough. Don't gorge yourself on it. Too much of a good thing has bad consequence. And it's not just things that you might express restraint in, but it also has to do in relationship. Verse 17, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you, and he will hate you. So there could be too much honey, or there could be too much of you. Both Both are not good. We need to be aware of ourselves and others, live with respect for both. Honesty, trust, awareness are the subjects of the next three parables that are here. Verse 18, we have more like in this series here. Like a club, or a sword, or a sharp arrow. All those look like pain to me. Like a club, a sword, or a sharp arrow is the man who gives false testimony against his neighbor. I have observed in numerous times in my life people speaking lies. Well, it's not really a lie, it's just not all the truth. It's not the whole story. But the bottom line that comes out is that it's false. It does not accurately, honestly portray who somebody is, or what something is, or what happened. A false testimony against a neighbor. It's like a knife in the back. A lie produces great pain. And the hard part about that is if you seek to defend yourself against a lie, it only seems to confirm that you must be guilty or you wouldn't be defensive. You understand what I'm saying? It's a hard place to be, what is created when someone speaks a lie. Verse 19, like a bad tooth, that's painful, or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in times of trouble. Be careful who you put your trust in. Make sure that they're trustworthy. You may find that an unfaithful person may create also a bad situation for you and more pain in your life. And verse 20, like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, steals your jacket, or like vinegar poured on soda. Can you imagine what that would be like? Vinegar poured on soda. An acid and a base. Do you know what happens when you put those two together? It's pretty explosive. He says, like one who steals your jacket, like one who mixes acid and a base, is the one who sings songs to a heavy heart. What was Paul's instruction to the Romans? It's chapter 12, verse 15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Doing the opposite of that is like someone leaving you shivering while they steal your coat. Or it's like the explosive mass created by mixing acid and a base. It's not helpful. Who are you speaking with? Identify with them. I've also found that it doesn't necessarily take words to communicate care and interest in somebody else. Just simply being present or touch can make a difference in somebody else that's affirming to them. I've been with other people who visited somebody at the hospital who was probably not going to live. They were in pretty bad shape. And I've listened to people come in and talk about their own ills and how I understand what you're experiencing right now because I've been there before. Now, that's not affirming to somebody. They just want to know they're not alone. They just want to know that there's somebody else around who cares, who's looking out for them. They don't need to hear your story. So how can I be affirming and caring, comforting to someone with a heavy heart? Live life that's consistent with the situation you find yourself. In verse 21, he puts it this way, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. This is Solomon's This is Solomon's proverb from approximately just a little after 1000 BC, 960 BC. Almost 1,000 years before Jesus quotes this. No, maybe that's a clue as to where Solomon got this phrase. Jesus knew it. As we find that in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus making this same statement. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him food to drink. Or give him water to drink. We also find that Paul quotes this proverb in Romans chapter 12. 2 quotes now out of this chapter 25 of Proverbs. Paul in Romans chapter 12 quotes him twice. And it's interesting that as far back as Exodus 23, God instructed his people to be kind to their enemies, because kindness can melt the heart of the adversary. One of the commentaries I read used the illustration of the way you melt metal is you put hot coals on it. You put it in extreme heat. So if you put extreme heat on the head, you'll melt. They were drawing the parallel. You melt the adversary in that context. I don't know about that. I like an illustration that a friend of mine from Mexico saw in this, is that if you live outdoors, if you're a camper, you know something about starting a fire. You need live embers to start the fire in the morning so you can cook and do your business throughout the course of the day, but you need live embers. And so to give somebody hot coals like that is a gift to them. It's not punishment to them. So I just thought I'd tell you that. But whatever it is, if I can be kind to somebody, I can help meet a need in their life, I'm doing a good thing to them. And the Lord will reward me for that. He's honored by that. So control your wrath. Replace it with kindness. Choose to be kind. Under self-control, that the innate nature of our humanness that's out to defend ourselves, promote ourselves, be the fixer, the one who makes everything happen. Guard your heart in that, and make the choice with self-control. Make the choice to live your life with humility. That's what I keep seeing in these verses as we come. And it's at this point in the dialogue here in verse 23, we find the parable turns to speech again. As a north wind brings rain, so a sly tongue brings angry looks. Sly, a deceiving, a lying tongue brings angry looks. As the north wind brings rain. That, again, an illustration would be better if you lived in Israel, because in Israel, the winds that come from the north are not pleasant for them. So the north wind in this, to the reader of this proverb in that context, would say, the north wind brings rain. This is not a good thing. So likewise, a lie is not welcomed. Verse 24, better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. I suppose he could have said husband. At any rate, the picture here in human relations is what's described in this. Better to live on a corner of the roof. In Solomon's day, a home would, on the flat roof, there would be a small room in the top that a guest could stay in, or a relative, or something. But better to live up there by yourself than with a quarrelsome home, or with a quarrelsome situation. Complaining, accusing, combative speech does not produce a peaceful environment. If it doesn't edify, build up, affirm the other person. Control your tongue and don't say it. Instead, be a comforting voice, a healing presence with people. Verse 25, Like cold water to a weary soul is good news from a distant land. We can choose to be positive or negative. It's our call. We can rest in God's justice or attack our adversary. We can defend ourselves, or as Jesus did, not my will, but your will be done, Father. Can I rest in his defense? We need to guard our hearts lest we pay back evil for evil. And that doesn't go anywhere for us. Verse 26 describes our potential loss. Like a muddied spring or a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way to the wicked. Don't give in to the persuasions of some people to do something. Well, it's not all that bad. Well, in this context, this is probably okay. You know, we can rationalize a whole lot of behaviors on our part that are destructive in the end. He says, don't do that. In self-control, guard the right living in your heart, in your life. Verse 27 repeats, pretty much summarizes what we've read so far in the chapter. Verse 27, it is not good to eat too much honey. So, restraint with self-control, and nor is it honorable to seek one's own honor. Guard your pride. Exert self-control when tempted to indulge, or when pride starts to puff you up inside. When you start to think, I'm worthy of this, I deserve better, you're headed down a path of destruction. As verse 28 defines, like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. So just guard your heart. Guard your mouth, guard your life, your relationship. I said the easiest way to do that is to determine up front, I'm going to walk in humility, that God thinks I'm somebody, and he wants me to walk in humility in a way that honors him. I don't need man to think something of me. If I'm honored, I remember my mom telling me when someone praised me for something, I said, oh, no, that's not a good kind of response. She says, Eddie, don't do that. She'd say to me, just say thank you. Honor them in return. And I'm going, okay, that makes some sense for me. But can I live my life in humility, with respect, with concern and care for other people? And so I asked the question, how do we develop this self-control? And I think a big part of it is choosing to value others over ourselves. When we feel the need to promote ourselves, we lose the respect for others. When we choose to be kind instead of vindictive, when we choose to allow God to do his work in another person's heart and in our heart, we are practicing self-control. Letting go of myself and trusting God to intervene will result in peace for me and often for others. And then I remembered something. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. The fruit of the Spirit. Remember the list? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. It's the 9th fruit of the Spirit, evidence of God's Spirit present in my life. As I pursue the Lord and I walk in relationship with him, I walk in relationship with him, his Spirit is free in me, and this becomes evidence in my life without my effort. So it's walking in that relationship with him that Solomon calls us to, points out in a whole lot of illustrations what can happen when we don't. And I'm hoping this is some help to you today. Lord, we're grateful to you. Grateful for your word, for your thought, for your instruction to us. Help us to live it. us to find our hearts and life focused in you, pursuit of you. So we know indeed, Lord, you are refreshing to us. You give us solid ground to stand on. You give us the gentleness of heart and spirit that we can give of ourselves. Help us to be people that honor you. We thank you in Jesus. Amen.
I can get ready for you.
Yeah.